Now, the trouble's with your attitude. You don't pay enough attention in class. You don't do enough work outside of it. You don't know what the word study means. You haven't the slightest idea.
Hey guys, welcome to Hip Hughes History. In this installment, we're going to take a look in the next maybe 15 minutes, but that's just a number I'm yelling out. Really, the history of federalism in the United States in political science terms, looking at the Constitution, and really how we've defined it throughout American history. So we're going to chop it up nice and easy and serve it up to you on a plate of political science. So if you're hungry, get ready because Hughes is going to feed you. Dinner! I got dinner! All right, giddy up. Here we go. So if you're going to understand like stuff today, and if we want to talk about current events, whether that be, you know, what you want to call Obamacare or looking at tax cuts or, you know, whatever you want to talk about, you have to understand constitutional language, right? We can't talk about football unless you know the NFL rule book. Yeah. So in the Constitution, federalism is kind of set up, and it's almost like bipolar in the way that the founders created the system, because you can definitely feel the influence of people like maybe Alexander Hamilton or you know, a strong central government kind of feeling to the document. And then you also, you know, sometimes I call them trapdoors, but you definitely have these mechanisms which really are going to make it hard for the central government to do its job and to limit its job to a certain respect and really reserve some of the power for the local entities at the state, you know, and local levels.
Federalism is the division of power between the federal and the state governments.
You might hear the term dual federalism, and I always think of that Venn diagram you've seen in school a million times, like the one right there. Dual federalism is a nice way to set up understanding constitutional federalism, because we can really plop, you know, on one side, the federal side, you know, more than a couple terms. So, you know, if I was going to say things in the federal government side of it when we're talking about constitutional terms, I would start with, like, the Supremacy Clause. I mean, the Supremacy Clause, what, Article 5 of the Constitution, is basically like laying down the law that says when it comes to it, when it's mano v mano, when we're playing, you know, like that the federal government is going to reign supreme over the states. So, you know, if you hear someone yelling, oh, the state is going to leave the Union because we have a right to, you know, I don't want to fight the Civil War again. All I'm going to say is look at Article 5 of the Constitution, right? So I'm going to write Supremacy Clause up there. Definitely, you know, there's delegated power in the Constitution, right? We can look at another lecture like Article 1, maybe Section 8, and really like all of the specific language in the Constitution which says to the federal government, this is what your job is. One of the key terms that I think is important if you're looking at it from maybe a progressive side of things is that very early in Section 8, it says that Congress may pass laws to promote the defense of the country, basically, and the general welfare, which is also in the preamble. And, you know, that idea of passing laws to promote the general welfare, that's going to mean something different to, you know, to Larry, Curly, and Moe. So, you know, again, Armageddon language isn't going to do anybody any good. I hear people saying, you're not a real American because you believe this, you're a fascist. Or you're a communist, you think the government. And we can go back to that original language and we can have that fight, but it's a fight amongst Americans seeking what's best for what, in their view, is public policy to help America go forward, whether you're conservative or liberal. So sometimes you got to tone it down. But nevertheless, we have delegated power, and we definitely have the Elastic Clause. And, you know, if you really want to play word games, the Elastic Clause summarized basically says that Congress shall use all necessary and pass laws that are necessary and proper to do their powers listed. And if you see the listed power of promoting the general welfare or passing laws for the general welfare, then anything that they want to do to promote that is constitutional language. But we can definitely have arguments on, you know, both sides of the fence of what's too much or what's not enough. Nevertheless, definitely, you know, Elastic Clause is going to beef up the feds. Beef up the feds. We also have other language like the Interstate Commerce Clause. And the Interstate Commerce Clause gives the federal government the right to regulate trade amongst the several states. So again, you know, it's interpretation. You know, we always have to be careful about people, oh, we have to do what they meant. Well, what does that mean? You know, is human trafficking, that's trade, right? Commerce, pollution, I don't know. Someone's got to regulate, you know, the airways, otherwise you have planes crash into each other. Does that extend to healthcare? That's the argument. That, healthcare is an important commerce, and that the federal government, in order to yada, 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 you already know the argument, and I don't care what you think. Either way. But definitely, we have a lot of power on the federal side. Supremacy, the ability to use the Elastic Clause, specific delegated power, broad language in the Interstate Commerce Clause, and then ding, 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 we got the other side. And the other side is really, in the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment in the Bill of Rights, which is pushed through by the anti-feds, the Thomas Jefferson lovers back then, the shield, what protects you from the federal government, the libertarian idea, the idea of Locke, and that government exists to defend our liberty that we're born with. That government does not give you liberty. You're not born, and where's the government? Where's my liberty? You're born with liberty, and the government's job is basically to protect that liberty at all costs. So libertarians, the Ron Paul people out there, they get really excited when you talk about that, because it is the concept of limited government. But we have to see, we have these two sides. So in the limited government, the 10th Amendment clearly states that all powers that are not delegated in the federal Constitution are reserved for the states. So if it ain't in there, you don't get to do it. And then again, if we go into interpretation, what does that mean? Well, if it doesn't say anything about, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something not too controversial, but maybe a little bit controversial, maybe drug legalization. I don't think it says anything in the Constitution about the wacky drugs, right? So according to that 10th Amendment, that's a reserved power. It's up to the state to decide. Gay marriage, it's up to the state to decide, right? Healthcare laws, it's up to the state to decide. Interstate commerce laws, the federal government regulate trade between the states. Elastic Clause, promoting the general welfare. If it ain't in there, you don't do it. If it ain't in there, you don't do it. But what about that? What about the Elastic Clause? What about the 10th Amendment? Grah! This is the political problem of our time. But remember, wherever you stand on whatever side of that fence of dual federalism, right? You're definitely in the constitutional game and you're an American. Remember that. Unless you're from another planet and you're an alien and you're a zombie and you're going to eat me. We're doing more. I hope you're hungry because I bought some layer cake federalism. That's definitely vocab you're going to see in a political science course, especially an AP government test. Layer cake federalism is a visual analogy to understand that we have a shift in a paradigm, a way of thinking about federalism after the Civil War. You remember, the Civil War is a war of federalism, right? That, it definitely freed the slaves, and the Civil War is definitely about freeing the slaves with the issue of the Emancipation Proclamation, at least theoretically. But it is not really fought over freeing the slaves as you go through that kind of 1820 to 1860 period. It's really a fight about the powers of the federal government in determining slavery in the western states. In class, we teach it, in the sense of manifest destiny leads to America pushing forward, right? The idea of birthing these new states. And these new states that are being birthed by America and the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, which is the pregnant mama idea. But once that birth occurs, the power between the states and the feds comes to a head because we're arguing about slavery. The southern states seeing, especially those southern states coming in, having a right, through the 10th Amendment and through limited government power to decide what to do about slavery. Whereas the federal government, especially the new Republican Party that's coming along by the 1850s as the Free Soil Party, is seeing that land as capitalist land, as free labor land, and slavery is definitely not good for, creating jobs. I think it does the opposite. So nevertheless, it's that conflict between state power and federal power that is compromised throughout the 19th century. Missouri Compromise, 1850 Compromise, popular sovereignty, the Supreme Court, Dred Scott, all that stuff leads to a head in the Civil War. But at the end of the day, who won? Who won? The federal government. So therefore, if we see it as layer cake, it's kind of like a larger stack on top, and then you have a shorter stack on the bottom. And they're separated, meaning that there's no intermingling between powers, which is going to come down the road. But this layer cake idea is bolstered by the passage, or the forced passage, wherever you want to think about it, as the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment. And, you know, we know 13th is abolish slavery, 15th is the black male vote, but it's that 14th Amendment that needs to be understood. And it is in the Constitution, and people get upset and they go, it's not a real amendment because they did it this way and that way, and it doesn't matter, all right? It doesn't matter. It's in there now. So the words, no state shall deny its citizens equal protection and due process under the law, is meant and designed to protect those freedmen down south from their own state governments. So the 14th is like a mitigator on the 10th, which says basically, look, you can do what you want in the 10th Amendment, but if it interferes with the federal protection of rights, which is the concept of the federal government protecting rights, right, the Bill of Rights concept, that the state can't violate that. So layer cake is that power that has been gotten by the federal government that's really not going to be able to be used effectively. Now, from 1867 to 1877, it is used effectively to a certain degree with forced Reconstruction, military occupation, African Americans serving in the legislature and voting, having rights. But once, Hayes is elected in 1876, in that election over Tilden, sometimes called the Great Betrayal amongst African Americans and scholars, that the military, it leaves, it makes that deal with Hayes, that he can have the presidency, the Northern Republican, but that basically Reconstruction is over. And then as those troops go north, the 14th Amendment's power kind of goes with them. In class, I've explained it as if the 14th Amendment is a tiger, which is meant to prowl around the southern states and protect the liberty of its citizens from its own state government, that now it's a toothless tiger. Meow. It has no power. And if you didn't believe that, Plessy versus Ferguson is almost like dental surgery. They're just going to pluck those teeth out with the words separate is equal, really deflating the 14th Amendment so it doesn't have the power that it was intended to do. Which is ironic because in the slaughterhouse cases that we learned about, what did the Supreme Court say in, the 1860s and 70s? It said that the 14th Amendment wasn't for corporations. It wasn't designed to protect people other than African Americans. So now they have a chance to live out those words, and they Google it. Boogle might not be a word. You might have to Google boogle. All right, so that's layer cake federalism, right? By the 1900 era, 1910s, 1920s, we do have a stronger federal government, absolutely, and we have the progressive era, and we have all that going on, and the expansion, and the 16th Amendment, and I know some of you libertarians just threw up on your lap if that was passed, graduated income tax. We have the square deal. We do have federal programs, but at a federal level only. So when Teddy Roosevelt passes the Pure Food and Drug Act, that's a federal government-only program designed to keep products safe. When you have conservation efforts, or you have even going back to the concept of regulating the railroads with the Sherman Antitrust Act and the Hepburn Act, these are at a federal level, not interfering really with state power to a large degree. There's some interference, but definitely not to a large degree. So I'm going to go bake my other cake. I have a different kind of cake to feed to you right now, so I'm going to go get it. I hope you enjoyed layer cake. I think that it needs some sauce for my soup. Dessert. Bam, marble cake federalism. How tasty does that sound? Layer cake federalism changes with the election of FDR in 1932 and the New Deal. Sometimes this is called cooperative federalism because the state and the Fed are working together in a collaborative effort to deal with the Great Depressionary problems that occurred after the stock market crash of 1929 and the onset of the Dust Bowl. So in marble cake federalism, you have a bleed through. You have programs that are sometimes developed at the federal level. Maybe take the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and the money is coming, through the revenue system from the Fed to the state. But the state is running the program. The state is in charge of, hiring and employment and maintaining it and regulating it and doing those types of activities. But the idea and the money and the direction in a large degree is coming from the federal government. Well, you have Social Security, SSA passed in 1935, 1936, something like that. The Wagner Act and collective bargaining rights. You have the CCC, which is run through the states, an unemployment program with the dollars flowing through the federal level, and other programs that are probably temporary fixes for the New Deal, but nevertheless, it's that bleed through. And with World War II, you have even more bleed through. If the New Deal didn't stall the Great Depression, I think World War II did, which is the same concept of the federal government pumping money through a progressive income tax system and sometimes deficit spending in order to balloon the economy and stimulate growth. But nevertheless, you do have that bleed through, whether it's rationing or the GI Bill in World War II, or even if you want to go into the 1950s and talk about Republican power, such as Dwight Eisenhower, the passage of the interstate highway system, and getting huge road construction and infrastructure spending from Washington flowing through the states. So that's called a marble cake, right? New Deal, right? 1932, maybe 1964, somewhere around there, maybe 68, I don't know. I'm going to come back and tell you in a second, and I hope that you enjoyed that. So remember, dual federalism leads to layer cake federalism, Reconstruction, 14th Amendment. That transfers into marble cake federalism with the election of the New Deal, Democrat FDR. And giddy up, we're getting there. We gonna get there. Okay, here we go. The federal government's going to really expand its power even more under LBJ, the War on Poverty in the 1960s. And now, we don't want to get too much into conservative and liberal ideology and equality of opportunity versus equality of outcome. But the idea is that we have huge problems that maybe the states aren't dealing with effectively. In some states, we have very high illiteracy rates. We have very high infant death mortality rates and hunger rates, poverty rates, as well as civil rights abuses. So basically, this is really where the federal government's going to act less as a partner and cooperative and more as a parent dictating to, I guess in the analogy, the state is the, one of the children, to deal with its problems in a certain way. And definitely for conservatives, this is too much government. This is big government. They see as intruding on liberty, whereas liberals or progressives would argue that this is dealing with equality of opportunity, that we are designing a program that needs to be designed to fill the holes that laissez-faire capitalism has created. But nevertheless, you can yell and scream all you want. I don't care, I'm on the other side of the camera. We just want to get the major ideas of this down. So creative federalism can be seen in a big program like Medicaid or Medicare, where basically the federal government now is going to design a program with rules and with money that is going to basically dictate to the state that you have to do this, and you have to do it this way, and you have to pay some of it as well. So Medicaid, which some of the money comes from the federal government, is sometimes referred to as an unfunded mandate. It's me, telling you, look, you are going to go out tonight, and you better be dressed to the T. I want you in a tux, and I want you to be there by 6 o'clock. We're going to have a good time. You better go pay for that tux now. That's the idea, that you have these uninsured, sick people in your state. You are responsible for them. They live in your state. So therefore, in order for public policy to work effectively, so children can be healthy and they can go to school and they can have opportunity, we are demanding that you provide these poor children with access to health care. And we'll help you pay for it, but it's your poor children, so you're going to pay for some of it too. So that's called creative federalism, but definitely Medicare, Medicaid, the War on Poverty, food stamp programs, designed to go after poverty rates. And although we are going to get more of a bloated government, you get more bureaucracy, absolutely. You get more instances of, corrupting power and those sorts of things. You go Google the poverty rates from 1960 to 1970. They're different. People have food in their bellies, and there's more people that have some type of sustainable housing that are safe, that aren't getting diseases, that are birthing healthy children. So whatever side of the fence you are on, we're going to keep going because that's creative federalism. We have like three more areas to cover. One is fiscal federalism, which is really kind of the whole gauntlet of the financial side of things that we'll summarize quickly for you. But the next in order is competitive federalism. Competitive federalism, and now I'll go to the last one too in this small section, which is new federalism, is really a concept that is devolutionary rather than really evolutionary concepts of growing the federal government. Devolution means the shrinking of. So decentralizing might be something that you hear, taking power away from the center and putting it back to the localities. You are going to have still, like, programs that the states have to do, but a lot of times it's kind of voluntary with strings attached. These are called crossover requirements. So, for instance, I might have huge amounts of money that are available for you to fix your highways. So that's all good. You can have the money. You just have to have a 55-mile-an-hour speed limit. That would be an example of a crossover requirement in competitive federalism, where the states are really competing for federal money. Not only in that sense, but also when we do fiscal federalism in a second, competing it for grants, designing programs, coming up with their own ideas in order to get that all-elusive federal money in order to implement those ideas. So competitive federalism is generally associated with Richard Nixon. And this is really flowing into the first era when we're going to shrink the size of the federal government soon. Not yet, but we're getting there. But we're definitely finding ways to give the states more responsibility in a certain degree over their matters. And that's competitive federalism. So let's just run right into New federalism, which is definitely devolution. New federalism is characterized by returning power to the states and shrinking federal programs. Ronald Reagan is the quintessential new federalist, saying that, the states don't need to be told what to do, that the federal government wasn't designed to do these programs in the first place, and that we need to return the power to the states. So you see large tax cuts, shrinking the revenue coming into the federal government, which means that it's not going to be able to pay for these programs. Reagan also increased defense spending, so he definitely didn't come out balanced neutral. In fact, I think the deficit increased rather largely under Reagan. But nevertheless, we are trying to return power to the states. I mean, this has continued all the way out through the 90s. The Democrat Bill Clinton, sometimes called a new Democrat, because some of his ideas are devolutionary, like the Welfare Reform Act that was passed in the 95, 96 after the Contract of America, basically trying to shrink welfare and forcing people to go back to go to work in order to get benefits. So devolution is the big idea. We don't have a lot of time to go into all of the laws in the 80s and the 90s. We'd be here forever. But definitely if you can get that word down, devolution, and you can associate it with the term new federalism, a new way of thinking about the circles, of shrinking that circle and growing the 10th Amendment circle a little bit. That's probably all I'm going to do right now. We're going to do some fiscal federalism, which is cha-ching, and then we're going to say goodbye and good night and goodbye and farewell. Okay, guys, nitty-gritty, man. This YouTube time is crazy. We can't be doing 20-minute lectures. Fiscal federalism is the term that's used to denote that you're talking about, obviously, the money side of federalism, how that cash flow works between the federal government and the state level. So most often in creative federalism, even marble cake federalism, you really have what's called formula grants. You have grants that are designed to deal with problems. So the percentage of poor children that you have in your state determines the amount of money that you get to feed those poor children for a food stamp program. That's a formula grant. As we get into competitive federalism, you do have competitive grants, which are programs that are designed to see who can come up with the best idea in order to get the money. This is really the approach the Obama administration has taken with education, with Race to the Top. Basically saying these are the standards, there's a whole bunch of money, come up with an idea to get to these standards, and we'll give you the money, but you have to do this, this, and this, and this to do it. So states come up with programs, they align their programs to federal requirements, and they try to get the money. And from a federal government standpoint, they see as raising the standards, as trying to get everybody to do a better job to get here. And at a state level, you have a lot of resistance where teachers, I don't know, maybe someone I know, thinks that maybe this is telling teachers that you have to teach a certain way in order to get money, which sounds like blackmail, but any way you think about it, that's definitely competitive federalism. New federalism brings new terminology. So basically, you're going to ditch the formula grant, which is seen as a handout or just giving money away for really doing the same thing over and over and over again, which is not succeeding in solving the problem, and having states develop their own programs and not having them compete the money, but just saying this is your money to begin with. So we'll give you a block grant. Like it says, a big block of money, and you spend the money the way that you want to. At the end of the day, the battle is between whether or not the states are dealing with problems in ways that create opportunity for all of their citizens. That's the federal government's argue, that if you're going to allow 15 million of your citizens to not have health care and to raise costs for everybody because of that, and to basically drag the system down because you can't deal with that problem, then we're going to deal with that problem. And from the state perspective, they're basically saying, this is our 10th Amendment right to deal with a problem in the way that we see fit, and that you are basically coming in and mandating how we should deal with the problem, which is an encroachment on our liberty, which you were designed to protect. But wait a minute, we're protecting the liberty of the people that you haven't protected. It's a crazy game of politics. But definitely you can go into the Obama administration, definitely bigger federal government programs, which are designed like creative federalism to attack problems, but not to the extent of the New Deal, definitely, and definitely not to the extent of LBJ and those types of programs. I don't want to get controversial, but we'll wrap up by saying, the progressive dream, the liberal dream, the democratic dream is for government to have one big government healthcare program that everybody belongs to, that gets good services, and, that doesn't necessarily have to be how you see it, but that's what they want. They settled on allowing private insurers to do it, but to mandate that everybody has to buy it in order to drive down costs. But that's the approach. And again, the Republican side says that's too big government, and the Democrats say it's probably not big enough, but we have to deal with the problem. But either way, we're fighting about federalism. We're not fighting about communism. We're not fighting about fascists on the right trying to, dictate to the world how you live your life. So the Armageddon talk needs to be turned down. And we can definitely talk about these political debates without trying to get too partisan, but really trying to understand the political science behind it, the terminology in the Constitution, and whatever else you crazy kids out there in Dreamland want to know. That's all I got. Federalism, baby. See ya.